Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Rising China and a pivoting America. According to a recent white paper, China's military establishment is carefully watching and becoming very concerned over Washington's strategic planning in the Pacific Ocean. The Americans say their pivot is a natural reallocation of resources. The Chinese see it as a regional policy of containment. To crosstalk China's defense concerns, I'm joined by Anil Gupta in Washington. He is a professor of strategy and globalization at the University of Maryland and INSEAD. Also in Washington, we have Matthew Schiavenza. He is an associate editor of the China Channel at The Atlantic. And in Boston, we cross to John Walsh. He is a contributor to Counterpunch and Antiwar.com, as well as a founding member of Come Home America. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want. John, if I go to you first in Boston, do you think that the Chinese feel like this is a policy of containment? We had containment during the Cold War of the Soviet Union. We have containment of Iran now. So China's next.
Well, I think there's little doubt about that because the United States, Secretary John Kerry, Secretary of State, says, and others say, that the United States is sending 60% of a vast military armada to East Asia, the Western Pacific. Now, they say, the excuse given is there's more economic activity there, so the U.S. needs to send troops. Well, down the street here, there's a sale at Macy's. There's a lot of economic activity. Do we need to send troops? It is just an absurdity. It's a nonsense. As far as keeping the seas open there, no one has threatened to close the seas. China needs open seas for its development, so that doesn't make sense. I think that this is yet another attempt by the United States to maintain its hegemonic status in the world. And I think there's a bit of panic going on here in the United States foreign policy establishment, because if they cannot break China up, then the United States is destined, if China is to become a moderately prosperous country and bring well-being to its citizens, then the United States will be in second place, just by virtue of the difference in population.
Let's go to Matt first. Go to Matt first. Go ahead, Matt.
Okay, fine.
Go ahead, Matt.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot more to the pivot to Asia than simply containment of China. I think that that's a very simplistic rendering of the idea. And I also wouldn't be overly sanguine about the sea lane issue. The fact that there has never been a threat to the sea lanes doesn't mean that there never could be a threat. And I think the United States has a legitimate interest in protecting the sea lanes and global commerce. And it isn't just Washington's interest. You also have to consider several of the other countries in the region that have very, very advanced trade relations with the U.S., Japan, South Korea, the Philippines. Those countries are also would prefer Washington's activity in the East Asia region, particularly in relation to the sea lanes.
Okay, Anil, in Washington, would you like to reply to what we've already heard?
Yes, exactly. Because, basically the last thing we should expect, last thing the Chinese would expect or any other government to expect is that for the U.S. to act irrationally. Given that Asia has about 55% of the world's population, it's more than 30% of world's GDP. By another 10 years, Asia will be more than U.S. and Europe combined by GDP. And of course, economic power and military power, they are, highly correlated in the medium to long term. And so it's rational for the U.S. To be focusing in terms of, quote unquote, the pivot, economic pivot, geopolitical pivot towards Asia. That's number one. Number two so we should not expect the U.S. to act irrational.
Well, the invasion of Iraq was irrational, wasn't it? Wasn't that irrational?
Wait. Of course it was irrational. That was completely stupid on the U.S. part. But just because the U.S. acted irrationally doesn't mean that it's good for the U.S. to keep acting irrationally forever, number one. Number two, is that we should not make the mistake of looking at this as a U.S. versus China. Because in this day and age, what we are talking about are coalitions. And actually, if the U.S. was, kind of jumping into Asia uninvited, that would be one thing I could imagine, a lot of concern about that. But U.S. is being invited back. You look at Japan, South Korea. Look at, in fact, a China ally for long times, Singapore, and of course, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Australia, India. And so when the U.S. is being invited back, we have to look at the coalition that's concerned about the robustness on China's part.
Okay, John, do you want to jump in?
Could I comment
Coalition.
on that, please?
Go ahead, please.
Could I please comment?
Please do.
Since I seem to be in the minority here. I think that when one talks about Japan and South Korea, one must remember that those are both occupied countries, occupied by U.S. forces. That is not trivial. Secondly, I think that you have to look what the U.S. foreign policy establishment is saying. Richard Armitage, former Undersecretary of State, and Joseph Nye were recently on a trip to Japan, an unofficial mission, but blessed by ex-Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And before that, they wrote an article. I believe it was in Foreign Affairs. I can't recall. I think it was in Foreign Affairs. And what they were trying to do in that article is essentially goad Japan into confronting China. Now, absent in the comments of the other two guests here is any acknowledgement that the United States is running an empire with hundreds of military bases all around the globe.
Wait a second. I mean, what basis do you have to
I would say that just one more thing, that the Iraq War was not
nonsense.
necessarily a mistake, because the policy in the United States, in the Middle East, and I think in the world, is either submit or be destroyed.
Okay,
Iraq
good point. Anil in Washington, go ahead, reply.
Libya did not submit. Libya is destroyed. It's a cruel and ruthless imperial policy.
Anil, go ahead.
We have to face up to it.
Wait a second, John. I mean, to say that the U.S. is an occupier in Japan and South Korea is fundamentally to misinterpret the reality. U.S. is, yes, a strong military ally of Japan and South Korea, and clearly has defense treaties with both countries. But, I come from India, and I know about British rule and British occupation of India. And essentially, the Industrial Revolution in Britain in the 19th century was fueled from India. So occupiers in the past have always had a history of actually emasculating the countries that they occupy. Look at how Japan and South Korea have performed with the, under the alliance with the U.S. They have thrived. And so to call it an occupation is complete nonsense.